I'm Alex.
And I'm Shane.
And this is the RPM podcast.
And welcome back to the RPM podcast. And you've joined us today on the second leg of the first triple header of the season, the Styrian Grand Prix. And obviously we're here for 2 weeks, lots to talk about. It wasn't the huge title battle we were expecting or were hoping for, but still lots to cover all the way from practice, the very first session, the very first 2 sessions of practice, all the way through to the end of the race. Lots to talk about, lots to get through. So it's still going to be a pretty interesting podcast as we dive into all the small details you may have missed during the race. So I think, without further ado, let's move on.
Let's get things started with qualifying. Now, the main thing I want to touch on here is probably one of the main incidences of the Saturday, which is Bottas suddenly being caught out spinning in the pit lane in FP2. I can't remember the last time I saw something like this happen. This was very, very unusual. Now, the explanation that came from Mercedes was that they were trying something new with their pit stops. You can see on the onboard that he comes out in second gear and maybe just a bit too much power. But something went horribly wrong there because it seems like somebody spinning in the pit lane is extremely rare. Now, what did you make of this incident, Shane? And did you consider his following 2 penalty points and 3-place grid penalty to be the right call?
Well, it's funny you say that you can't remember the last time something like this happened in the pit lane. And it's because there's so many rules and regulations in the pit lane to keep the various amounts of people in the pit lane safe that it's very hard to do anything wrong. I mean, sometimes we get an unsafe release, but that's as far as things can go wrong in the pit lane as far as we're concerned in the modern era of Formula 1. There's no refueling because it was deemed too dangerous. There's speed limits. There's limited amount of crew. The photographers are out the way. And even the cameramen, or women are completely out the way and without, not in harm's way. So for something like this to happen is really rare. And I was so shocked, and it had to be Bottas, the guy who needs a strong weekend and a strong comeback to fix arguably a very poor start to the season. I mean, he's back down in 5th place at the beginning of this race. It was a very interesting spin, and it did look pretty dangerous. And I heard the radio between the FIA and the McLaren pit wall. I'm not quite sure who was on the radio, but he made a very good point that there are people working in the pit lane, and you can't have a car traveling down a pit lane, sliding about at 50 miles an hour, narrowly missing pit crew. Actually, we were very, very fortunate that no one got hit by that Mercedes. Like the way it slid, it's a busy time of the session as well. It was just very, very unusual. And to answer your question, do I think he deserved the grid place and the penalty points? 110%. 110%. And I'll explain to you why. This is a free practice session, and yes, they were trying something new in the pit lane, but again, it's a free practice session. So do you have to commit 110% to launch yourself out the pit box? Yes, I know you want to practice what's going to happen during the race or maybe during qualifying, a quick turnaround, but also you're going to have a lot more, there's more times to practice as well. You don't have to commit 110% straight away. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how you get into these situations. You did put people's lives at risk. You did endanger the people in the pit lane. So thus for you have to deal with the consequences, whether it was on purpose or whether it was a complete accident. So a 3-place grid penalty for the driver and 2 penalty points, absolutely within reason. And I'm glad you've brought this up. What's your view on the whole spin edit?
Yeah, I can't help but agree. Really, it is the right call to penalise him in that way. There isn't really any excuse for it. I don't quite understand how he spun coming out in second gear. You'd think in second gear they'd have
less
more
wheel
traction. So I don't understand how it happened. But yeah, the hows and whys are less important than the safety aspect of it. I remember Grosjean span at the end of the pit lane, didn't he? There was a bit not at the very end where they're actually coming out onto the track, but the usually barriered off exit after the last pit box.
Okay, yeah.
I think he span there a little while ago and wrecked his front wing or something. But to do it out of the pit box is very, very unusual. Maybe got onto a painted line or something. Nonetheless, yes, I agree. Definitely the right call in terms of punishment. Anything else you want to cover for qualifying?
Well, whilst we're on the topic of punishment and grid penalties and penalty points, can we talk about Bottas again, but this time being impeded by Yuki Tsunoda? And how?
Oh yeah, Tsunoda. Yeah,
Tsunoda got
he got end up penalties as well, didn't he?
Yeah, so he ended up with the same penalty, a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Bottas, and then 1 penalty point on his license. And now this is something
after a pretty good lap as well.
Yeah, it was a very good lap, and this is something I actually disagree with. I've watched this footage back time and time again, just because it's been available on my phone. It was played so many times through the pre-race coverage because it was the drama preceding the race, and at no point was Yuki on the racing line through turn 6 or 4. I don't know what turn it was. It was, just before sector 2. The right-hander.
It's weird, Austria, isn't it? Because the corners are sort of not really proper corners in some places.
You've got the first turn,
6 proper corners.
The second kink, the third,
I think it's 5.
Right. So it might be the 4th and 5th, the double right-hander. There's a 4th and 5th turn where he, in my eyes, stayed as far left as humanly possible to stay off the racing line. At no point was Bottas anywhere near him, but received a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Bottas, and I'm really not sure what else he could have done apart from driven on the gravel to get out of the way. I thought it was very harsh, and it was a shame because actually he qualified quite well. In retrospect, he then gave Russell his best qualifying position ever, which was the beginning of a pretty good weekend for Russell, if you look at it from some points of view. So, I'm a bit 50-50 on the matter, but I do think it was quite harsh.
Yeah, sadly, there was a few drivers that benefited from drivers ahead of them getting penalties, giving them the possibility for a good result. But not in neither case did it really come to fruition. So obviously Lando ended up P3 because of Bottas's penalty. But yeah, it was something of a tale of penalties in qualifying. I didn't really get a proper view of the Tsunoda incident, so I can't really comment on it too badly. I have to watch it back afterwards. But it did feel like when you've got a track that short, at one point there were 16 cars on track going into I think it must have been the Q1 session, and the very, very end, people trying to set laps to get out. It's always going to be busy. It's a short track. There must have been all sorts of impeding going on. Why that one was singled out, I'm not really sure. I didn't get the sense that it was as serious as they made it out to be.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's not the shortest track on the calendar, but it's the fastest by a long way. So actually, the cars are going to be closer together and traveling at higher speed. So there's always going to be people in the way. But like you said, I'm not sure why it was only him who was pointed out or picked on, because there was lots of cars getting in the way of each other, especially towards the end of Q1. Like you said, I think Hamilton was driving in and out of cars trying to get around them just to cross the start-finish line with some free air, because everyone was just holding back. One of the shock results of qualifying for me, and I don't think you're going to enjoy this conversation, but it was Daniel Ricciardo. I couldn't help being really disappointed but incredibly happy for McLaren at the same time. And I think Zach Brown's reaction on the pit wall was very justified, because at one point he had Lando Norris, who was in Q3, because we already knew Bottas had that penalty. Not Q3, he was in P3 because we already knew Bottas had that penalty. So it was great. Lando Norris is in P3, second row of the grid. And then Daniel Ricciardo back in 13th position. It was a bit of a shocker for him. What's your take on that?
At the end of FP2, he was second in the timing sheets. And I saw that and was like, here we go. This is it. Daniel Ricciardo. He's coming back after France. And he himself said that pace just disappeared on the Saturday and just didn't seem to be able to pull anything out of the bag. I was watching closely to see if maybe he was impeded, maybe he got trapped somewhere between cars, but no, he seemed to have the free air and opportunity to make laps when he needed them. He didn't seem to have an explanation. The team didn't really offer one either. We did see that they had potential power issues in the race, but that's a completely separate day. I don't know whether they were also suffering issues there, but they seemed as baffled as I was, and I could only watch and kind of feel very very ambivalent, because like you say, Lando Norris was going to be starting P3, and that was very exciting, and Daniel Ricciardo kind of nowhere to be found.
And ultimately that was almost a feeling throughout the whole weekend, because Ferrari have actually closed the gap. And we'll get onto the standings later on, but Ferrari have actually closed the gap to McLaren now this weekend because they had ultimately a better combined finishing position. And this is why this fight's going to be so interesting and so important, because last week we were talking about how maybe Ferrari have come off the pace and McLaren could walk away with it. And a week later, Ferrari have made some gains and we're at the same track again next week. So who knows? But that's all I've got for qualifying, unless you've got anything else.
No, that's it for me. Your talking point next.
Let's just start with lap 1. It's been a long time since we've almost done this in chronological order, but I think it's only fair to talk about lap 1 because lots was happening. And I just want to talk about our man Gasly, who's had a superb season so far, really showing what that AlphaTauri can do. And unfortunately, I was really looking forward to this week because he started in P6, which was a great qualifying position. He's got a really strong car, got that Honda engine. So good points were definitely on the table. And he was just really unfortunate because by turn 3, his rear left tyre was evidently had a puncture and he collected, I think, the Williams and an Alfa Romeo going into turn 3, which damaged his suspension, which ultimately led to his retirement. And there was lots of comments on social media, like there always is, and it was very 50-50 on whether Gasly did a great job to get out of the way of everyone with the puncture he had, the slow puncture, which was he clearly knew about because he had quite a lot of lock on his car trying to keep the car in a straight line, and then he broke quite early into turn 3 to avoid overshooting or hitting anyone due to the lack of steering. But by doing so, he kind of collected those rear cars, and 50% of people said he's done a great job to avoid any further accidents, and 50% of people said, well, he's managed to hit 4 people in the space of a straight line. So what's your take on the situation? And let's not forget that obviously Leclerc caused this puncture, which in itself was very strange because there was plenty of room on the track, and Leclerc just, I don't know, there's no other way to describe it apart from drove into the back of Gasly. It looked like a rookie mistake, according, from what I saw. Again, I'm not a Formula One driver, and I'm sure, hearts were racing and, they were all in the zone, but it looked like a bit of a sloppy mistake because there's plenty of room either side of Gasly, and Leclerc just drove into the side of him.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that the conversation is about what Gasly was up to. Gasly did nothing wrong, as far as I'm concerned. I watched back that incident a few times because it's the start of the race. There's so much going on. You kind of end up going to have to revisit it. And very bad judgment from Leclerc. He has more than enough space to make room. Yes, there are cars ahead and behind, but not either side and not close enough to not make it possible for him to move further over to the left. It's one of the wider parts of the track. Clips Gasly. Gasly gets a puncture. And that's essentially his race over, as you've mentioned. I think he did pretty well. You can tell that he's struggling with the car. There's not a whole lot he could do. He obviously knows he's going to be slow, so he's going to try and keep as much pace going as possible. How easy that is to control going into the corner, I have no idea. But how well Gasly has done to avoid further incidents is somewhat secondary to the fact that Charles Leclerc has driven into another car, ruined their race, and that has subsequently ruined a bunch of other people's races. Not even an investigation.
No, not at all.
No investigation at all. I can't understand that at all. The first touch that they made going wide into turn 1, it's understandable cars usually go kind of wide there, and it wasn't that risky a contact. But when you're going on a straight line, lap 1 or no lap 1, he caused that accident, and there wasn't even an investigation. I don't understand. In fact, he was driver of the day at the end, and he did have a good drive. We'll talk about that later on because he did have a good drive. I don't want to take that away from him, but not even an investigation. That should have been. I'm amazed that wasn't a penalty. I don't understand how you can drive into the back of someone's car like that, cause a puncture, and in a straight line with more than enough room to not cause it, and not even get it noted by the stewards. I think that's bizarre.
And that move led to the retirement of one car, and then led to an impact of 2 further cars. So I'm not sure. Like you said, I'm not sure how he got away with that. Lap 1 or no lap 1. It's a relatively straight line. It's
no
a straight line as you're going to get
at all. No ambiguity for me. When I saw that incident, I'm just like, he's just driven into the back of him. So
it's a shame because
it was really weird.
That was definitely a low point for Leclerc this weekend. But because of this, he had to pit early or had to make an additional stop to fix his front wing. and then had a fantastic drive to finish back in the points. But if he hadn't have hit Gasly, then who knows where he would have ended up with. But what a shame. What a shame.
Yeah, especially for Gasly. I don't think Leclerc was Gasly's driver of the day. That's for sure.
He definitely didn't
felt
vote.
like he could have achieved quite a lot this weekend. It felt like, and it was all over again. I mean, we've seen Gasly like in Bahrain, for example, and that was his fault really. Like he just clipped Daniel Ricciardo in Bahrain. Should have been more careful. But all these great results on Saturday don't mean anything if you're basically out of the running after lap 1. So Gasly, in this incident, not his fault at all, but I hope for some more consistency for him. Some of it is just in the hands of the racing gods, if you like. But for Gasly, I hope for some more consistency for him.
Luckily for him, he can try again next week.
Yeah, plenty. He's got better practice now, maybe. Moving on and continuing on to Ferrari and McLaren, seeing as we kind of mentioned them before and we've talked about Leclerc. Now, It was an immense drive from Charles Leclerc to pull it back after he was essentially at the back of the grid after lap 1. He had to pit again for a new wing. He did that to himself and essentially took Gasly out of the race, but sort of made up for it with this drive. He put himself back into P7, basically, which is where he qualified. Sainz was also a very steady pair of hands and put in a very good performance. And we can compare that to McLaren, as you mentioned earlier. Norris was very strong out ahead, but I was a little bit disappointed that neither he nor the team appeared all that interest in really pushing to hold on to P3 because it felt like they let Perez go by. Door was wide open, no real attempt to defend. Maybe they were just trying to run their own race and ensure that they scored better than Ferrari rather than trying to put themselves in a risky position to hold on to a podium. If that's the case, I can't help but be a little bit disappointed because McLaren has got on the podium twice already this season. Fight for more.
Yeah.
Fight the Red Bulls. Why not? This sort of, we should play it safe and hold on to points against Ferrari. I do see the logic behind it, but I'm there going, no, get in his way. Like, hold on to P3, make a statement. And it just didn't really happen. And I was a bit disappointed by that. Daniel Ricciardo, the last of the 4 drivers in the spotlight here, just very disappointing again. I feel like if this were any other driver in any other team, I'd be raking him over the coals by now. So I feel like I've kind of got to do it for Daniel Ricciardo as much as it hurts me. Just leaving Lando high and dry, like not giving the team any real strategy options. He needs to at least finish in the points. I can understand him struggling in the lower positions, but not even finishing in the points is very frustrating. He pitted on lap 24, I think it was, or maybe later on. But he was supposed to pit to overtake Raikkonen, and when he came out of his stop, he was P15, 2 places behind Raikkonen. So whatever went on with outlap and inlap in the period of time before just didn't have the pace. He did finally get past Ocon and Giovinazzi to end up in P13. I think he finished the race, but just big questions as to what's going on. How can you end up number 2 on the timing sheets in one of the FP sessions and then be that slow and just not even capable of passing an Alfa Romeo? At one point, he was behind Russell, and I was like, sorry, Russell, I want you to do well, but come on, Ricciardo, get past him. It's a Williams. Like, for goodness sake, It's a Williams. Get past him. I think he had some kind of power issue or something, which wasn't really his fault, but it still took him too long, in my opinion, and very frustrating. So it's advantage Ferrari this week after we spoke last week for the French Grand Prix about how, it's Ferrari slipping away, they're not developing their car. Ferrari seriously came back this weekend, and Daniel Ricciardo could be that Achilles heel for McLaren.
Yeah, I can completely agree. I really enjoyed those first couple of laps. You mentioned how as soon as Perez got past Lando, McLaren just kind of settled for P4 because they weren't really going to fight for those top 4 positions. But actually, the first lap or 2, or the first 3 laps where Lando was holding up Perez, it was really good fun to watch. That Red Bull undoubtedly looked quick. Yeah, the Red Bull undoubtedly looked quicker. Perez in that Red Bull looked rapid. He looked really strong, which is great to see for the sport. Really good for Red Bull, and played a massive hand in their strategy this week again. We'll talk about that later on. But Lando defending from that Red Bull looked amazing, and Lando can race. He's a really good racing driver. He's got great attacking skills, great defending skills, but unfortunately just didn't have the momentum that Red Bull did this weekend to keep Perez behind him. But as soon as Perez did overtake him, like you said, McLaren very quickly settled. And that's not what I want to see. Like you said, at this track before, Lando last year received a podium. So that should be that should be momentum, that should be drive, that should be passion to try and score a podium again, because you've achieved it before. It's already scored a couple of podiums this year, but McLaren just kind of settled. They just took the foot off the gas just to bring home the decent points instead of risking it for maybe a couple more. There's a big difference. 12 points of P4 and 15 points of P3. So there's definitely more points to gain from McLaren, but they just didn't execute it this week at all. As for, we've talked about Carlos having a very good, consistent race. Actually, at one point, I think he was up 5 or 6 positions. I can't remember where he qualified, but he was definitely one of the biggest gainers this week. And as for Charles, obviously he boxed on lap 1, like you said, and then was at the back of the grid. But Daniel Ricciardo, I'm not going to completely echo what you've said, because I agree. There's no need to go through it again. Really, really disappointing. And we're over a third of the way through the season now. And it looks so promising. Lando came out of the practice session saying, we've got a brilliant car. We've got a decent car. This car and this track is a perfect combination. He was buzzing. And I thought, hold on a second. This is it. This is going to be the one where maybe Daniel gets a P5, Lando gets a P4, or maybe one of them ends up on the podium. I was really feeling it this weekend. And it just did not materialize, which was just such a shame.
Yeah, maybe with the different tyre compounds next week, it'll be different for the car, different for Daniel. Can only hold on hope at this stage. Big questions to be asked for Daniel still. We know that he's a very capable driver. We had a comment on our video last week. It was about McLaren's excellent work in the French Grand Prix, and I forget who posted it, so I apologise to them if they're listening to this, but it was a comment on that video that basically said they thought that Ricciardo would end up outscoring Lando by the end of the season. And struggles are clearly not over, but it still feels like he could really pick it up. I still have that hope. I still have that feeling about him, because I know what he's capable of as a driver and seen it in the past. So, and it kind of saw a big uptick in performances when he was at Renault. There was that kind of point where something suddenly seemed to click, and he was it was lucky he was going to get 1 podium, and he ended up getting 2, and Ocon got 1 as well. So we just don't know what's going to happen yet. I'm not going to write him off, but I am feeling that I've got to criticize him pretty heavily, because I would do the same if it was any other driver in any other team.
And we only criticize him so heavily because we know his potential. Like you said, we've seen him at Red Bull. We've seen him. We're harsh because we love him. We've seen him at Renault. Like you said, he got better as the time went on, which is great. And we just need that same story to happen with McLaren. Jumping back on to what I said about Carlos, he started in P12, actually 1 position ahead of Daniel Ricciardo, and then finished in P6. So he gained 6 positions, whereas Ricciardo stayed exactly the same. And this is where McLaren has done a struggle this year, because Ferrari made the best out of a pretty poor qualifying session. And not to forget that obviously Charles had that front wing incident, and they finished 6th and 7th. And McLaren still failed to capitalise on that, not their second driver, but on Daniel's car, which is a massive shame.
Moving on to your next talking point then.
Well, we've kind of brushed on it. You kind of mentioned our boy George keeping up Daniel Ricciardo. And it's only fair that we give him a little bit of a shout out, because what does this guy have to do to score points? He's had an incredible weekend. And before you say finish in the top 10, I know, you have to finish to score the points. But come on, this guy has the worst luck in the world. Some races he generates that own luck by crashing out when he's in the points, but this was not one of those races. So like I said, really good practice sessions, amazing qualifying, initially in P11, which is fantastic, equaled what he did last year. Clearly likes this circuit. It is a powerful track, but it's all about momentum and heavy braking, which clearly, it's only 2 technical aspects. So the less technical aspects, the better for Williams. So that's why that car probably did a little bit better this week. and then got promoted to P10 on a fresh set of tyres going into the race, which was just the perfect combination. You're in the top 10 with a fresh set of tyres. What more could you ask for? Secured a couple of positions off the start line, and for so often we've seen, and this is not a criticism, we've seen Russell out-qualify his machinery and end up losing 3 or 4 places off the start line and falling back into 15th, 16th position and then having a race. Not this week, starting in P10, was comfortable in P8 for, I can't remember how many laps, but it felt like a long time. And then we heard that he was going on to a 2-stop strategy, and eventually he ended up retiring due to a power unit problem. I don't know the ins and outs of why he retired. Do you have any more information on that as to why he retired, or was it just a power unit issue?
That's the only official response. We did see them topping up what looked like hydraulics when he came into the pit stop. That may have contributed to it as well. Just a couple of things about to add on what you said there about Russell. Yeah, he had a very confident start. It was lap 26 where he first pitted from P8, so he had a very, very, very good stint.
Yeah.
To hold that position. I think it even does him a bit of a disservice to say that he outqualified his machinery, because I actually think that Williams genuinely was that fast. You can look from the lap times that they set that they were absolutely in contention for good positions.
Yeah.
And so it's a sign that this is potentially a good track for them, or they continue to do small developments on the car that are working. So I feel like Williams had deserved a certain amount of credit on the car for that. But as for Russell and his bad luck, off the top of my head, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first incident that I can think of where Russell's been in genuine contention for points and it has not been his fault at all. He's genuinely had no part to play in failing to score. I'm trying to think of another incident where he was genuinely going to score and it was completely out of his hands, just like a mechanical failure like this one.
Mercedes last year?
Yes, okay. Yeah, I meant in a Williams, but okay.
Okay.
For Mercedes, yeah, sure.
That was a stretch. But no, he has created his own luck. He has created his own story, his own ending a couple of times behind safety cars and on race paces, and obviously crashing out of Bottas at the beginning of the year for P11. It's still a shame. It's still a shame that he's not scored any points in that Williams. And it was pretty unlucky. He had to retire.
Terribly bad luck. He had the pace, absolutely. His engineer came on the radio at one point telling him that they were sort of looking at plan B and they were looking at reliability. So he was racing his heart out to hold that position and was absolutely catching Alonso as well. He was really racing, doing a great job. Obviously, the reliability, something on the car, let him down. So not his fault at all. But also just a day to forget for Williams in general, really. Latifi being involved in an incident early on meant that he had to pit and didn't really make an impact. Both of the Williams cars were the first to be lapped in the race as well, which essentially kind of made it all over for them. And it just it meant that the weekend of promise evaporated. Russell was very gracious on the radio. He was saying, there's no need to apologize. We'll be back next week. He had a good attitude towards it, and I think the team in general can probably feel a bit more positive about the pace that they did have.
100%.
Didn't come to anything.
Yeah.
But so your faith in Russell for points this season not shaken at all?
Not shaken at all. We're back at the same track next week on softer compound tyres, so I'm hoping he'll be able to achieve something very similar. It's just going on a little bit of a side note now. We're talking about how maybe he hasn't outqualified that Williams, and actually the Williams is maybe very good in some bespoke, specific circumstances, and that was this week. So we having what's your views on Latifi? Is he slacking? How much is he slacking?
He's very up and down, isn't he? Very inconsistent, Latifi. Sometimes he just very quietly manages to nudge his way into like P11, P12, and you don't even really notice. And other times he's, battling the Haas for P19 or something. He qualified P16, so he was actually not too far off getting into Q2. He was less than a tenth behind Giovinazzi, so he was very close to achieving a good result in that regard. He beat Ocon, he beat Raikkonen. He did all right in terms of the pace that he's shown in general.
But equally, George was...
It's hard to know how he would have done in the race.
But George was like 1,000th off Q3. So there's still that huge deficit. There's still a whole qualifying session between them at the moment. If you think of it that way,
they're just very different, very different levels of drivers. Really, there's no disrespect to Latifi because, like I say, he is absolutely capable of good result, and I think he deserves that seat for what it's worth. But George Russell is just clearly on a slightly different level as a driver. Like he's clearly a very, very capable guy. So that gulf is just down to something that is really hard to understand, and it's like the gulf between Verstappen and Hamilton and the rest of the field. These guys are just miles ahead of everyone.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they're driving the same machinery as their teammates who are nearly a minute down the road. They're lapping like 2/3 of the field after half the race. It's madness. How do they do it? You just have to look on and be like, this is just something else. I don't even understand this.
I'm glad you mentioned his radio back to his engineer and what he said after the race and how he greeted his team and how calm and cool and collective, and actually it's a team sport. But I think that's quite nice to hear that actually he was very supportive. But on the other hand, like you mentioned, he has been the cause of a couple of missed points in the past. So actually, there's a bit of respect both ways. They've got to work together really well, and it looks like they do work together quite well, to be fair.
So, I agree that not all hope is lost. Some very positive signs, but Williams still needing that consistency to make it count, and to really claim just 1 point would make all the difference.
It really would do. It's millions of pounds, especially going into the cost cap era next year. That's the money they need, and arguably they deserve. So who knows? Right
then. So that's Williams and Russell. Let's talk about, I mentioned them just now, so let's talk about Verstappen's win and the battle for the championship. So Verstappen won by a record-breaking margin. I believe the biggest win margin at the Red Bull Ring was about 14 seconds or something, which is Hamilton last time. Verstappen won by nearly 40 seconds.
Yeah, I'm just going to interrupt you there if you don't mind, because
go for it.
This frustrates me, and I'm fairly sure you'll go on to mention this, but it gets me a little bit, irate, because the commentators after the race were like, this is the biggest win by any car on the Red Bull Ring in the Red Bull Ring's history. Max Verstappen won by 35.7 seconds, which is incredible. But actually, the rules and the point system is ever so slightly different to what it was 5 years ago. We now get a point for a fastest lap, so strategies are different. So the commentators said, Verstappen won by 35.7 seconds on the same strategy as Lewis Hamilton. Yes, in one hand, they were on the same strategy. They both went for the single stop strategy, but also Mercedes went for the fastest lap. Mercedes went for the fastest lap, so of course they're going to be 20 seconds further down the grid because they executed a second pit stop. So it's like records are broken here, records are broken there, and it's a humongous win. But it kind of just... If you didn't watch the race, say you didn't watch the race at all, and you're coming back on Monday, you just want to have a look at the timings, and you want to see who won and who won by how much. That doesn't show you that Lewis actually made a second. It does show you that Lewis made a second stop, but it doesn't show you he made it because of the fastest lap. And actually, a lap beforehand, he was only 15 seconds away, which is still an incredible feat for Red Bull. Don't get me wrong, I'm not taking anything away from them, but the times show 35 seconds or whatever it is, and yet they were two different strategies. The strategy was to get a point for the fastest lap. So it just annoys me how the commentators completely just forget the fact that this move was executed 2 laps before the end of the race, and actually the gap was probably 15 seconds instead of the 35. Back to you. Sorry, I'm so sorry about that.
Are you suggesting that people embellish or omit important details in order to get people to consume their content?
It's not right.
Surely not. Surely not.
You wouldn't think it happens, but it does.
Yeah, it's. I know what you mean. Yeah, they obviously Hamilton pitted to get that fastest lap. It would have still been the record-breaking deficit or whatever. But again, it is something of a technicality in some ways because, like you say, the change in strategy. But more importantly than the gap between Hamilton and Verstappen was, I thought, the gap between Hamilton, Verstappen, and everybody else. They were just absolutely miles away of everyone. And I remember Martin Brundle and Crofty were talking about it, just saying, where are they finding? It's not a long lap. Where are they finding this time? It's just unbelievable. So they were miles ahead of the rest of the competition. But even then, it was wasn't much of a 2-horse race because Verstappen had it absolutely wrapped up. It was a dominant performance. Hamilton never even got anywhere close. And it sounded like on the radio, they just had there's nothing to offer. They had no options. I remember Bono at one point said to Hamilton, our options are just trying to win the tyre deg or whatever. That was just, we don't know. We got nothing. Keep going, I guess. See what happens. We should mention the wingman game as well, because it was absolutely Verstappen's dominant performance. Not too much to say up front. But for the teammates, Bottas did a very good job to take points off Perez. He did have a good drive. He held off in the closing laps, grabbed the final podium. It was a better day for him after probably a rather embarrassing Saturday and Friday. Sorry, it was Thursday. It was at FP2 where he spun, wasn't it? So that was kind of followed on from that. But yeah, he totally recovered. Mentally, he actually seems very, very strong. For all the criticism the guy gets, he must have one of the strongest mentalities on the grid, I think. To be under that much scrutiny in that kind of position and still manage to pull out those results, I think that, is very commendable. If he'd started P2, I still have the feeling that Hamilton might have made short work of him, but it's no way to know how much he might have been able to capitalise on that pace had he started in his actual qualifying position. Perez was very quick, again, as you mentioned earlier, but the slow pit stop on lap 27 was very costly. It looked like he really needed just one more lap to potentially get the better of Bottas.
Oh, blimey.
And,
one more lap.
That pit stop, that might have been the difference. I mean, if
the finish of that straight,
that could have been it.
If he had finished that straight, he would have probably been ahead going into turn 1 for the 72nd lap or whatever the next lap would have been. Yeah, it was so close. And I'm glad we had that little chase towards the end because it really brought that race alive, because the teammate battle or that second place driver battle is so important at the moment. And Red Bull have come out on top again.
Yeah, certainly in the winning of the race, but it was very, Mercedes managed to capitalise. Bottas deserves his credit there, but it's very, very close. Still very, very close in the wingman game, and there was not a lot in it, just that pit stop. Question is, Shane, are we potentially in for a repeat next week as far as the race winner is concerned? Because I believe the tyre compounds will be one step softer. Are we just going to see Max Verstappen disappear off into the distance again?
I hope not. But that Red Bull has been so dominant this week. The rear wing, the way the engine works, the way it works at this altitude, the drivability of it. Max says it's one of the best cars he's ever driven in his entire life, which is such a compliment to the designers and to everyone who's worked on that car for the last 4 or 5 years of Max in it. We're going to, it's exactly the same track, just a step softer. Mercedes, they might be able to out-strategize Red Bull. But there again, we've seen Red Bull out-strategize Mercedes this year. Usually, Mercedes are, absolutely perfect and will execute the most, the most efficient strategy and will win the race. But this year, we've seen both teams execute fantastic strategies which have won them the race. So I do think the pace advantage is with the Red Bull and thus for Max Verstappen. But if Mercedes can get their strategy right, or maybe if Lewis can maybe get P2, and take the fight directly to Bottas. I mean, he did take the fight directly to Max this week, but he just had nothing to give. Like after the first couple of laps, it was just a 10th here and a 10th there, losing time. We didn't even see Lewis in DRS, I don't think. That's how quick Max managed to pull out that lead, which is exactly what he needed to do. It's very interesting. We're going back to the same race. Maybe if it rains, it'll be interesting. I don't know. What's your view? Do you think they'll just walk away with it again? Because it was a dominant win.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if we didn't just see the same thing happen again for Verstappen. That car is scary around that track. It is the Red Bull ring. I'm sure it plays some part in it. They test there and they suits their car to some extent, but also it's just an absolute beast in a straight line. Hamilton was complaining that they needed more power because of the speed. I think, although Perez, at one point complained about the speed that Norris had in a straight line.
Yeah,
that's why I was frustrated that he just let him go by. Yeah. It looked like, but anyway, but as far as Bottas and Perez is concerned, though, we could see a quite different tale because it was all couched in Bottas has got a penalty. Perez obviously had to fight back, but had the had the slow stop, which potentially cost him getting past near the end. I think we could see a very different tale between those two. As for Hamilton and Verstappen, yeah, I don't know what else Mercedes can do, and I'm not sure they know either. But so they might be waiting for another track to come along.
Yeah, we've never. I'm glad you mentioned the radio message between Bono and Lewis, because usually there's different options, there's different scenarios, there's different buttons, there's different driving styles. And Lewis was like, "What do I do?" And Bono was like, "Well, we have nothing. We have no answers." He was like, You're just gonna have
not
to
even a calming kind of like, don't worry, Lewis, we're going to do this. It didn't even get any of that. It was just sort of the options are to tyre day.
They knew they weren't going to win, and they knew they weren't probably going to drop into third place. So it was just stay the course, which is the last thing any driver wants to hear. Well, you're in P2, you've got no chance of being in P1. Maybe this is how Red Bull have felt for the last 4 years, and now the tail.
Yeah, Hamilton, welcome to Max's world.
Yeah, the shoes on the other foot now. It's definitely interesting. I love the dynamics between these teams and how they're reacting and how they're coping under what is probably a very stressful and the most stress they've been under in the turbo hybrid era. But it's exciting because Red Bull are top of the game at the moment, and Mercedes need to pick up the pace. They need to find some pace somewhere, and Lewis has admitted in post-race interviews he has no idea whether it's under braking, whether it's straight line speed, whether it's the rear wing. He has no idea where they're going to find that pace because, well, they haven't had to for the last couple of years. They've always been a second faster than everyone else. So I'm glad he's being quite humble about it. I haven't heard him saying he loves the battle for a while, but he's not.
He didn't get one this week.
There was no battle this week. That's why he didn't say he loved it. But he's still quite calm, cool, and collective. I think he knows that there's a long calendar ahead. And actually, I think Max is only 18 points ahead, which is a decent lead, and Red Bull's furthest lead in any championship for a very long time. But there's still loads of races left this season, so anything could happen. Reliability could really be the deciding factor this year, especially with such a long calendar. It's exciting. I say this every podcast, so it's going to be so good. Imagine if Red Bull win the final hybrid era, turbo hybrid era. That would be crazy.
Honda going out with a bang. Like
they did last time.
Yeah. Any more talking points for yourself?
Let's have a look. I've got Perez here in his second pit stop and how I thought it was executed maybe a lap or two quite late. I remember watching it and thinking, that's pretty bold. He's 25 seconds behind Bottas with 18 laps to go. I was like, this is a fairly short lap. But saying that, the first couple of laps, he was knocking off 2-point-something seconds per lap. And I was like, okay, this guy means business. He's chasing him down. Maybe next week, they'll box him a lap earlier or 2 laps earlier just to give him a little bit more of a chance. Who knows? Hopefully we have like a 2-stop race, a 2-stop strategy across the whole board next week. To make things a little bit different on the softer compounds. But fantastic drive from Perez. One of the drivers I'm most impressed with this year. He was down and out last year. He didn't have a drive towards the end of last year, and all of a sudden he's driving for Red Bull. It's a very questionable seat. We've seen drivers come and go quite frequently in that second seat, but actually Perez is proving to the whole world why he deserves it and why he should be, because he's only got a year contract as it stands, and why he should stay in that seat moving forward. And unfortunately, because he's doing so well, said the same about Carlos Sainz when he's doing quite well at Ferrari. He is doing quite well at Ferrari, actually. He's matching Charles's pace and finishing ahead of him most races now. It only highlights the struggles of Daniel Ricciardo at the moment, and hopefully he can get on top of those moving forward. But that's
Perez,
it for my
worlds apart. Perez worlds apart compared to the previous drives from Albon and Gasly, and that's not just to disrespect them as drivers, because there may be certain aspects of the car that are difficult to get to grips with, and we've seen that it's a high pressure scenario as well, and they were both very young and pretty relatively inexperienced going into that seat, which is very much the opposite case for Perez.
Yes, so exactly.
There's many factors at play. But yeah, the performance-wise, he has totally justified his position in that seat, and I would have thought Red Bull and Verstappen are very, very happy with him, as I'm sure they've said multiple times now that they're quite happy to have him there and that he's a great force for good within that team.
Right, it's time for our segment View from the Stands, where you guys can get in touch with us through Twitter or through email at RacePerMinute and info@raceperminute.com and ask us some questions on the latest race, or just give us your views and we'll comment on them and we'll let you know if we agree or disagree. So the first one is from RPM legend Dave Doherty, and he said, your thoughts on Russell and Bottas, which I think we've covered quite extensively through this podcast. But one thing we haven't done is speculate or talk about contracts, which has been quite nice. I don't think we need to go into it because both drivers had a pretty standard race. Unfortunately, George DNF'd. It would have been a great result for him. And Bottas did exactly what he needed to do and placed that Mercedes right behind Lewis and score as many points as possible. So I don't think I can't really comment on who I think is doing a better job at the moment. Both drivers are racing for their careers. So hopefully that summarizes my views on Russell and Bottas. Alex, anything else to add?
Not really. I do feel that they, like you say, they both did a good job. So there's nothing guaranteed at the moment. It feels very much up in the air. There's a long season to go. Bottas could yet prove himself, as he always feels like he's in a position of potentially yet proving himself. But a lot of factors at play. Russell is doing a great job to prove himself. That much is certain.
Interestingly, at the beginning of this race weekend, I heard an interview with Sky Sports presenters and Toto Wolff, and they said, how would Mercedes look if they had two British drivers? Because at the moment they have Bottas and Hamilton, and would they want to put a German driver in the mix to, maybe solidify that Mercedes kind of relationship? And Toto's response was, we don't really care what nationality our drivers are. It's a global company. And if we end up with two British drivers, then it would be great for Silverstone. So, they're open to anything. But it was a very well answered question, which doesn't surprise me because I'm sure they've rehearsed that answer many, many times before. But thank you very much, Dave.
Possibilities.
Absolutely. But cheers, Dave, for getting in contact once again. Your thoughts and questions are always welcome on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And moving on to another regular contactee at DanielFergie25 on Twitter. Thanks very much for getting in touch as well. Yeah, he asks us, how do you feel after knowing how close Russell was to scoring his first points for Williams, only for him to retire because of a mechanical issue? Now, again, we have touched on this slightly, but I remember when I was watching it, I saw it happen. And this was when they had to pit the first time, and I saw the guys come out with the hydraulic canisters or whatever it was, and I was like, oh no, this is not good. This is
not
actual
good.
Problems. This is, because you could see straight away they were just coming straight out with these issues, and it wasn't just a regular pit stop. After that, I felt like it was only going to go downhill from there, and I was sadly right in a way that I didn't want to be.
Mystic Alex got it right.
And I knew that you were going to be. I knew that you were going to be upset. I knew it was a bad day because I know you're really rooting for the guy. I want to see him do well as well, but I know that you've pinned one of your bold predictions on him, and it feels like he's just so close, but not quite.
He's been so close so many times. I want any driver who hasn't scored points to score points. I mean, I love seeing drivers accomplish things they've not accomplished before. But just
who doesn't like an underdog? Exactly.
And this week, could have been. Honestly, we were so close. And Daniel, if you're watching on the podcast, I've got this massive grin on my face, but actually, I'm very sad inside. I just have to laugh, otherwise I will cry, because that's how I felt when I saw Russell.
Well, that's all right. I think Daniel's a video viewer, so you can emote to your heart's content.
Yeah, it was just sad because as soon as he came into the pits and I saw more than 4 tires come out, I thought, that's it. This is it. He's not gonna score points with with a braking car. And then, it was just put him out of his misery and retire him when he came in that second time. It's a shame, but we are back at the same track next week. Russell did say after the race he doesn't know if he'll be able to achieve the same next week. Step down on the tyre compounds. Might be different weather, different winds, different climate. So who knows what's going to happen? But we can hope. Russell for points next week. You heard it here first. every week. But thank you very much, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks for getting in touch. And don't forget, you can always send in your comments and questions to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter. or you can get in touch with us on the website RacePerMinute.com, where you'll find our contact form. So thanks very much for getting in touch, and keep them coming in. Now we're moving on to Driver of the Day and Championship standings. Now, popular vote for Driver of the Day went with Leclerc, which is understandable to a degree because he did have an immense recovery drive, having to pit on lap 1 and get back to where he started into P7. But I'm going to go for his teammate, actually. I'm going to go for Sainz. He had a very, very underrated performance this Sunday. Started P12, ended up P6. Certainly benefited from Russell, Gasly and his teammate being bumped behind him, but overall he had very, very solid pace, kept his nose clean to secure some really good points for Ferrari, helped in their battle in P3, and even managed to get past Bottas at one point to unlap himself to help maintain the pace, which is, once you're lapped, it's very easy to just, you're stuck. It's very easy to just go backwards.
Wasn't it Hamilton? I think it was Hamilton he lapped himself with.
I thought it was Bottas, but it was a Mercedes nonetheless. It was a Mercedes anyway, but it's impressive that he was able to do that to keep the pace up, because that's pretty key when you're in a race where lots of lapping is going on a short track, because like I say, you can just end up going backwards. You reach a plateau and there's still 20 laps to go or something, and you just can't make any progress otherwise. It's very impressive when a driver can do a recovery drive like Charles did. He is a great driver, and he did some fantastic overtakes. There were some really, really good overtakes, especially going into that turn 5 or 4 or 5, whichever one that sort of double right-hander is. But Carlos has the edge for me on the basis of consistency and keeping his nose clean.
Yeah, and it's a rare occasion on the RPM podcast, but I completely agree with you. Carlos Sainz gets my vote for Driver of the Day, because I don't feel like I can give it to Charles Leclerc, because he did take another car out of the race.
And got away with it.
And got away with it.
Got away absolutely scot-free.
He got away with it.
That's fair at all.
It was a really silly, basic move which caused, a front wing to be damaged and a rear puncture. Had plenty of room on the track. He was going in a straight line. It could have been completely avoidable. And this is where Driver of the Day for the national viewers or for the global viewers is more of a popularity contest than it is an actual Driver of the Day contest, because we very rarely see Hamilton over the last 4 years get Driver of the Day, because people want Max or people want Charles because they've maintained, whereas Lewis has been flawless all weekend. But couldn't give it to Charles this weekend because he caused an accident, or he caused an incident which took a driver out of the race, got away scot-free. Yes, it was a great drive to come back, but his teammate gained 6 positions over the whole entire race, kept it consistent, really clean drive, out-qualified his teammate as well. Just a really good weekend for Carlos Sainz, and he should be pretty happy with himself.
Definitely. So the constructors' standings as a result meant that there was a few changes potentially coming, but otherwise there's big battles forming in several different places now. Obviously at the top, Red Bull continue their lead, 252 points to Mercedes 212, opening up to a 40-point gap now. So it's really going to take a bit more of a sea change in results to get Mercedes back to the top. McLaren still hold on to P3 though. Norris's points so far are keeping them there. Daniel didn't score, and obviously both Ferraris scored, bringing Ferrari up to 108. There's still a reasonable gap there, 12 points, but Ferrari, if they maintain that consistency, they'll find their way back up there. But the third battle, which is now emerging, is AlphaTauri v Aston Martin, 46 and 44 points respectively. So that's an interesting battle for P5 too, which we saw in contention in this race as well. So I think Vettel was kind of the one missing out for points on that occasion. Where did Stroll finish? I'm trying to remember where he ended up.
Stroll finished in P8. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Vettel in P12 who failed to score, while Tsunoda got a point. Obviously, Gasly, DNF, not really his fault. That AlphaTauri looking rapid. So there's like these 3 big battles going on, sort of separated from each other by a good number of points. Take us through the rest of the constructors.
So there you've got Alpine with 31 points. Fernando Alonso back in the points again this week and is really enjoying driving that Alpine car. He said so on the radio after qualifying. I think he said, "I don't care where I finished. That felt great," or "that was a brilliant lap," which is so good to hear. And I think he finished in P9 this week. Yep, finished in P9, so picking up a further 2 points. A little bit often. Ocon out of the points again this week, unfortunately, but who knows what's going to happen going forward. Alfa Romeo still on 2 points, failing to score any points this week, with Williams and Haas on 0. Williams obviously maintaining that P9 in the Constructors' Championship because they got that P12 finish in Baku, was it? Oh, no, it was France. I can't remember. But they finished P12 on a recent track, which has put them ahead of where Mick finished one race with Haas. So that's going to take some doing to undo where Williams finished in the Constructors. If he had scored points today, I think it's 2 points for P8. You know, they could have been battling for P8 in the Constructors' Championship. You never know.
4 for P8, isn't it?
Is it 4 for P8?
4.
Yeah, it is 4 for P8. So they would have been
P9, yeah.
Yeah, they would have been P8 in the championships if Russell had finished 8th, which would have been incredible. Would have been the most points they've scored in a fair few years. But it wasn't to be. But all hope is not lost because the car is looking good, especially around the Red Bull Ring. Let's talk about the drivers' standings. So, Alex, talk us through the top of the grid.
Well, Max Verstappen, 156 points, fairly comfortably leading over Hamilton. There's 18 points between them, though, so there's a race win in it still. So it's still very much a big fight. It is definitely a big fight. It's not all over yet. Still only about a third of the season. Long way to go.
This will become really important at the later parts of the season. If Red Bull need to change any components in their car outside of their allocated slots, they can afford to start from the back of the grid if they've got that race wing in the pocket. Because you know Max will surely be able to score points in that race starting from the back of the grid, but it doesn't mean they'll lose as much as you would do if you was neck and neck throughout the whole championship. So building this small but often points or building this lead is really important, and we'll see that towards the end of the season where cars are really struggling with reliability, I do believe.
Yeah, that they will have a big advantage if they can widen the gap even more. Then we have Perez going into P3, 96 points. Norris 10 points behind that with 86. He continues to score points at every single race. His perfect record just gets better and better, and he finished P5, of course. So it's those top 5 finishes as well that continue. So it just outside of the Red Bull Mercedes, he's like the best of the rest in that regard. So very, very happy with Norris's performances. Bottas 74 points in P5. If you can have a few more performances like he had today, then he could find himself back into P4 and P3 not too long, but just needs to find the consistency as well. Leclerc P6 with 58 and Sainz very close by with 50. So they're in pretty close contention. Obviously, both making what they can out of that machinery. It's always a good sign that both those teammates can keep up with each other. Ferrari not suffering like a lot of other teams where there's this huge disparity in performances between their two drivers. Ferrari not suffering from that, it seems. Gasly P8, it feels like he should be so much higher, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's so many examples where he should have had a P6 or somewhere in that region, and it's not happened in this case through no fault of his own whatsoever. And then 9th place, Daniel Ricciardo, 34 points. Again, similar story. Should be way higher. Should be scoring more points. McLaren could be not too far off Red Bull if he'd been scoring anywhere like Norris had. So it's a shame that it's not turned out like that so far. And Vettel clinging on to P10 with 30 points.
It just goes to show that we've spoken about, not Aston Martin particularly in this race, but throughout the whole podcast season, that's not what we're calling it, the 2021 season, and how Aston Martin have struggled. And then you see Seb Vettel with 30 points and Daniel Ricciardo with 34. It really starting to highlight how much Daniel has been struggling in that car and how much he really needs to put his foot down and start scoring some decent points, because he's at risk of being swallowed up and dropping into P10 and then P11. It's really close. It really is. So you've got Sebastian Vettel, like you said, with 30 points. Fernando Alonso in Alpine doing a great job his first year back in Formula 1 for a couple of years in a car which is probably not up to scratch with 19 points. Much better than his teammate who's only on 12. Lance Stroll, the other Aston Martin driver, is in P12 with 14 points. Esteban Ocon, we just mentioned, P13 with 12 points. Yuki Tsunoda, interesting story because he's got the car. He's starting to cool down a little bit. He's starting to keep the lid on. He's starting to stay a little bit more composed and score some decent points. And he's got 9. So I think we'll see him move up the ranks or move up the standings towards the second half of the season, I'd like to think. And then we're down to the lonely ones. We've got Kimi Räikkönen and Antonio Giovinazzi in 15th and 16th with 1 point apiece. And then George Russell, Mick Schumacher, Nikita Mazepin, and Nicholas Latifi, all with 0 points. It wouldn't surprise me if we see Nicholas Latifi move from P20 to P18 in the Drivers' Championship with a good finish. Like you said, it happens not too often. It happens quite rarely, and we don't often hear about it on the commentary. And then all of a sudden, he's finished in P12, and actually he's had a fantastic race, which would put him in P18 in the Drivers' Championship. So we can hope, but Williams is just edging out the Haas team at the moment.
Just as his name has been mentioned, and I didn't have anywhere else to fit it in the main discussion, you mentioned Mazepin. Did you see that he got given a little branded spinning top by Tim Steiner?
How
He's got a
savage.
sense of humour about himself.
Yeah. If you don't laugh, you'll cry. So,
yeah.
At the end of the day, he's bringing in the money.
And he's not last in the Drivers' Championship.
Exactly. So. Yeah, exactly. He's 19th, isn't he? Let's have a quick look. Yeah, I just read it out. Yeah, he's 19th.
They actually had a good little battle, the Haasers, didn't they? They had a little fight with each other at one point.
And I don't think they touched, which is a first. Because
very
that
respectful.
was getting a little bit heated. Maybe they've had a little bit of a talking to. Of course, the Haas team, very used to, they're not too, well, they've had that conversation time and time again with their previous drivers about keeping it clean. So I'm sure it's quite a common conversation in Gunther Steiner's office. But hopefully they can continue fighting out, and we can hopefully get to see a little bit more on TV as well, because there's a couple of overtakes this week, a couple of fights on track, which the TV director missed. I'm getting a little bit annoyed with these really wide pan shots where I get to admire the trees and like fences, and I get to see F1 car through posts, and I'm like, well, that doesn't do it.
There's actually something happening on track.
There's something happening on track.
Action?
Let me see it. Put an onboard on. I want to see what's going on. But maybe we'll see what it's like next week.
Or they end up, as per usual, bothering one of the team principals, and when you want to hear other information. So
yeah, they haven't bothered Christian Horner in a while, because he's probably been a little bit busy. He's probably told them to leave him alone while he's he knows what he's doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right, there we have it. The first race of 2 at the Red Bull Ring. Will Red Bull ring again for success next week? Who knows? But you can join us again next week for the podcast. You can also send us your thoughts or questions on this race or anything about Formula One to us on Twitter at RacePerMinute. Or you can get in touch with us at our website, which is RacePerMinute.com. And there's a little contact us form. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment. Whatever way you want to get in contact, we will be sure to get back to you. We love hearing what you guys think, and the interactions have been great. If you've enjoyed the episode, please give us a like rating or subscribe wherever you get Race Per Minute, whether that be on YouTube or the podcast apps. You've got Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or whatever it is. Like Alex mentions every single week, we are driven by this algorithm-based world, which no one quite sure knows how it works, but likes and comments and subscriptions really help boost the podcast. We see a couple of videos get really good traction, get a fair, couple of hundred views, which is really good to see. And the comments are all buzzing, and we get to really interact with you guys, which is exactly what we want. So if you can give us a like or subscribe, that would be absolutely amazing. And if you really want to support the show, help keep the quality content coming and receive some lovely rewards, you can do by donating as little as £1 a month at patreon.com/RacePerMinute. That's all from us. Alex, any final thoughts on this week's race?
Just that this is such an unpredictable track. I remember last time we had the Austrian Grand Prix and the Styrian Grand Prix, they were very different. We keep hearing promises of rain that don't materialise.
Oh, blimey.
Maybe next week will be the week. It could be the week where somebody says it's going to rain and it actually does for a change.
For those of you who are still hung around after the closing comments, I actually text Alex saying at the beginning of the race weekend saying 100% chance of rain, or there's meant to be rain this weekend. And Alex texts back saying, so confirmed bone dry track. That's exactly what it was. It looked like wonderful weather out there. So hopefully next week something else gets thrown into the mix, because I actually believe it started raining 10 or 12 minutes after the race had finished, which is so typical in Formula One fashion. It's happened so many times before, but hopefully next week, a little bit of water on the track. And I'm not talking about the sprinklers.
Yeah, no, but I don't think Bernie's anywhere near it these days, thankfully. So
Thank
it's,
goodness.
no sprinklers. But yeah, we could see a very different race, and I love this track. So thoroughly looking forward to it.
Thank you
We'll
very
see
much
you
for
there.
watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.